Yo guys, welcome to the Zelda fiction. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto fell in love with Shikamaru? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. When they returned that evening to the Nara estate, Naruto was exceptionally quiet. It wasn't uncomfortable, though, as for Shikamaru, Naruto wasn't that much of a stranger anymore. Their relationship had developed to a point where he didn't feel the need to avoid an awkward silence. Back at home, his father was sitting on the floor of the living room, watching his shogi board pensively. "Hey," greeted Shikamaru. His father turned to look at them, a friendly smile spreading on his face. "Welcome. How was your day?" At that, Naruto seemed to gain her usual energy back. "Great. Konoha is amazing. I'm happy to hear that." He motioned on the other side of the board. "Do you know how to play shogi, Naruto-chan?" The chan had been added since Naruto had refused a san, claiming it was too formal and set a too heavy atmosphere for someone like her. Shikamaru had yet to call her with that honorific as he felt uncomfortable using it. That would sound like she is his girlfriend or something. Granted, she was his fiancée already, which destroyed the basis of his argumentation, but he conveniently skipped that part. "No, I never tried because it looked like it needed a lot of patience. I'm not very good at that." Shikaku laughed. "I'll explain the rules, then." She made a face at that. "I'm not very good at comprehending and applying them." Of course. She was someone who learned in a more practical way and needed hands-on experience. "I'll show you." She turned to look at him with her big eyes. "Us against my father." She smiled. He conveniently skipped the part he referred to Naruto and him as us. Playing together with Naruto was oddly fun. Which was unusual in itself, as shogi often was entertaining but never really funny. However, the strategies, if they could be called that she proposed once she understood how the game worked, were almost comical. Naruto hadn't been exaggerating when she stated that she didn't have the patience to play shogi, as she made two brash decisions. Her moves were hasty and risky. It didn't take long for her to want to start sacrificing most of the players they had just because she was getting bored of the status quo on the board. As a result, they lost every time, but he still felt oddly satisfied when he looked at how she scratched the back of her head at having lost again. He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder that made him open his eyes. "Hey Shikamaru, are you sure you want to come with me? I really memorized the way to the tower." Naruto's voice sounded even scratchier than usual, he noted hazily. It couldn't be too long since she woke up herself. Shikamaru. He was dozing off again. It was early and he was very tempted to simply stay in bed and keep on sleeping, but he had been the one to suggest accompanying her in the first place. Yesterday evening, in between the many shogi games, his father had told Naruto that the Hokage would be expecting her today at 7 a.m. As he had been curious about what the Gondaime would talk about with the girl, he had wanted to go with her under the pretense of making sure she didn't get lost in Konoha. Although Naruto assured him that she could find the tower on her own, she couldn't be too adamant about that since it didn't take long for him to convince her. Now she gave him a way out again and he was tempted to grasp this chance, but damn, his curiosity was nagging at the back of his mind. He wouldn't have a restful sleep anyway. "I'll come." Just he felt the compelling need to close his eyes. 5 minutes, he slurred quietly. There was giggle. He opened one eye. "What is it?" She approached even further and sat on the side of the bed which he wasn't occupying and shrugged. "What?" he inquired, but she only shrugged and giggled again. "It's nothing, really." Shikamaru rolled his eyes. "Just say it so that I can enjoy the next 5 minutes dozing instead of pondering what you meant," he mumbled grumpily while snuggling into his pillow. The smile never faded from her face. "You're cute when you're sleepy." The next 5 minutes were spent wide awake. When Naruto exited the room to let him change into his clothes, he trusted her not to tell his mother about this effective way of getting him out of bed. When they had arrived at the Hokage tower, they were forced to wait 10 minutes before they could finally enter her office. Of course, Tsunade could decide that whatever she wanted to talk about with Naruto was private and thus, send him on the floor to wait. That would mean that waking up earlier had been for naught, but he was willing to take that risk. When they eventually entered her office, Tsunade lifted her head only for a surprised look to take over her face. "Naruto-chan." Her smile was oddly soft. "Tsunade." The happiness over seeing a familiar face in Konoha was apparent in the girl's greeting. "Wow, all that paperwork is not set up. You're actually working. Is this real?" Her inquiring was shockingly rude and Shikamaru had never heard talking anyone that way with the Hokage. Naruto Uzumaki's surly was surprising, but he began to think that she had a death wish as well. But the older woman only sighed exasperatedly. "What about your friest? Are they real?" He nervously searched for the gem in his pocket and started to distract himself because Naruto's friest was something he definitely not wanted to think about. Normally, Shikamaru wasn't someone to blush over female anatomy because he could distance himself from situations quite efficiently. That meant that a woman's freaks were just a part of her body like her arms or feet, thus, not worth getting excited over. But it was the knowledge of Naruto becoming his wife in the future and the inevitability of he couldn't even end that trail of thought. Irritated about his own reaction, he fisted the moss agate in a tight grasp. Damn it, he was no prepubescent kid and the knowledge of having sex, there, he said it, in the future with a girl standing next to him, shouldn't embarrass him as much as it did. Although he tried avoiding his eyes, he could spot the blonde girl blushing and bristling at the same time. What kind of dumb question is that? The Gondai seemed to suppress a chuckle, but her amusement was obvious. Well, the last time we met, how old were you? 12. 13. I wasn't working and those two, she pointed in Naruto's general direction, which Shikamaru refused to inspect, were nowhere to be seen. I guess things change, huh? While Naruto embarrassedly tried to retort, Tsunade started to laugh like she was having the time of her life. Ah, teenagers so easy to rile up. At that moment she briefly glanced over to him. Shikamaru had no doubt that she blatantly saw through his stoic facade. Then, she mercifully changed the topic from his fiance's body to his presence. Playing guide, Shikamaru. Before he could open his mouth to attempt to answer, Naruto was already talking. She seemed to have recovered from her earlier state of stuttering quite quickly. Nah, that was yesterday, Tsunade. Today, Shikamaru wanted to make sure I don't get lost, although I totally memorized everything by now. The Hokage lifted one perfect brow. Is that so? Her tone was heavily laced with sarcasm. My, Shikamaru helping ladies in need. What a gentleman. This time, Shikamaru grinned. As always. Tsunade rolled her eyes. Whatever. Just sit down, you brats. She tiredly sagged into her seat and stretched herself. And? How's everything going? Naruto shrugged. Great. Konoha is cool. And really big. Normally it seemed that it was a hard feat for her to sit still, but it was apparent that it was an even bigger effort now. She jiggled her feet up and down, crossed and uncrossed them, laced her hands together, only to fix a strain of her hair in the next moment. Her gaze was expectant, as if asking what now. Next week, Tsunade said after a longer silence, getting straight to the point. What next week? Naruto inquired. You know how people officially become ninjas, right? Normally, when they want to become shinobi, they first visit the academy. After graduating, they will be put into teams that will be tested by jonins, who eventually determine whether the graduates get to become genins. Tsunade eyed the other blonde critically from her feet till her head. Obviously, I won't put you into a class with some children. That would be a waste of time. So I'll assign you to a jonin sensei who will determine whether you get to become a Konoha shinobi. Naruto's features became focused, the smile that was adorning her face only moments ago had vanished. Will I be tested in a team or singly? Tsunade shrugged. Both is possible, but that will probably be deterred by the jonin running the test. Shikamaru chose that moment to interrupt. And have you already chosen the one who will be testing her? If she said a name, it wouldn't be much of a help for Naruto, but it was highly possible that Shikamaru knew something about the person. Maybe he could give her some instructions for her test. The Hokage narrowed her eyes. I have someone in mind. But I'll have to speak with him about it first. Anyway, I'll inform you about the exact time and place later on. When Shikamaru and Naruto finally returned home, he could recognize an annoyingly familiar voice. Previous thoughts of going back to sleep having been given up upon, he paused in his tracks to inhale deeply. The blonde girl stopped little after that and blinked at him confusedly. He shook his head. Nothing. Brace yourself. Her addled expression not fading, she resumed to walking with Shikamaru following her closely. And, of course, he had to be right because that annoyingly high voice could only belong to Ino Yamanaka. Said girl sprang up as soon as she spotted them and started tapping her foot up and down in a universal gesture of impatience and irritation. I can't believe you lied to me, Shikamaru. Were her first words. Next week. You said next week on Tuesday. Bored and annoyed because he didn't get nearly enough sleep to deal with his former teammate, he answered. I didn't say anything. I only asked you whether you knew who was on patrol at that day. Ino seemed to become even angrier at that. It is the same. You did that on purpose to give of the impression that she would arrive at a later date than she actually did. He merely rolled his eyes. Of course, I did that. Can't believe you fell for it, though. Not as observant as you'd like to be. The girl opened her mouth to give a probably very loud retort on his comment, only to be beat by the other girl who he had almost forgot was standing next to him. Hey, I'm Naruto. Ino confusedly closed her mouth to look at his fiancé. I'm Ino, she retorted, curiously mustering the other blonde girl up and down. Shikamaru and I used to be teammates while we were genins. Naruto's familiar toothy smile spread over her face. Really? tell me some gossip over breakfast. During breakfast that Shikamaru and Naruto only had now, as they didn't eat anything before leaving the house earlier, Ino was invited. Luckily, the girl ignored him for the most part for the sake of giving the other blonde all the information she had on him. I'm telling you, Naruto-chan, she voiced after swallowing a piece of egg, your fiancé is just about the laziest guy in Konoha. Naruto's eyes grew big. What, really? Ino opened her mouth confusedly. Don't tell me you haven't noticed. Please, Naruto, she pointed at his direction, look at this guy. Even the way he's sitting and eating is lazy. Naruto mustered him as if searching for the features Ino had described. Her stare made him slightly uneasy, and he casually dropped his hand to search for the gem in his pants pocket. I don't know, she finally retorted. I mean, I'm not here since a long time and of course you should know him better, but Shikamaru seemed, she paused to search for the right word, attentive, helpful and even dedicated. Shikamaru played with the moss agate while ignoring the uncomfortable feeling of being talked about while being in the same room. Either, Ino began, one brow raised, you, Naruto, are just an incredible airhead, or her gaze wandered to him, you have spoken some magic spell that makes Shikamaru do crazy things. It was then, when he realized that he was indeed acting vastly different from how he usually would. Naruto didn't arrive long ago, but he had already spent more time with her than without her in that period, sleep included. I'll go wash my hands. He needed to get away. Slowly, he walked out of the dining room and washed his hands in the bathroom as lazily as possible, in the hopes of the girls being finished with their conversation by the time he was back. But when he approached the dining area again, he was disappointed. Ino was still talking. Really intelligent. Yeah, I didn't used to know much about him, but the one thing I was told was that he was smart. His father's is also like that, I noticed. Naruto. That's classically Nara. These guys are almost notorious for their intelligence. That bastard could always set up the best strategies while on missions. Shikamaru resumed to waiting on the floor, refusing to enter the room. He'd rather wait for this talk to end. But you know what, Ino's voice took a softer tint, those strategies he forms have the goal to reach the maximal satisfaction rate. Not for him, but for all. He wouldn't show it, but he is selfless and caring like that. Before Naruto could retort, he deliberately made much noise to alert them of his presence. Then, as if not having heard their exchange, he nonchalantly sat on his chair. So Naruto-chan, Ino changed the topic effortlessly, you have to meet the others, too. Others? The blonde girl inquired. Yeah, the rest of Team 10, for starters. Although, we technically aren't a team anymore, but we still meet regularly for barbecue. They'll be excited to see you. The happy smile spread over her face and she turned to him. Shikamaru. Momentarily, he was confused. It was almost as if she was asking for his permission. Yeah, of course. Her smile grew wider and bemused him even further. While Ino and Naruto kept on talking and making plans, he tried to understand her behavior, but no amount of beepizing gave him an answer. It was absurd. Why would she ask him? He wasn't one to give orders, and she wasn't one to accept them. Oh, it's gotten late, the ash blonde girl exclaimed, I've promised my mother to take over the shop. I have to go. For the sake of being polite, Shikamaru accompanied the girls to the gates of the compound. Naruto-chan. It was his mother who was screaming at the top of her lungs from the garden. Come, I want to show you something. Yes, I'm coming. Naruto shouted back, only to turn around and smile one last time at Ino. It was great talking with you, we'll see each other next week. She ran off quickly in the direction of Yoshino, while Shikamaru resumed to walking with his former teammate to the gates. So Ino began, quite a catch you've got there. That doesn't mean you have to try to set me up with her, he retorted when remembering what she had told Naruto when they thought he wasn't listening. She only raised a brow. So you eavesdropped, huh? What are you grumpy about? I wanted her to have a good impression of you. It doesn't matter. He paused. They had reached the gates. You and my mother don't have to play matchmaker. We are already engaged. That makes this whole endeavor pointless. She bristled and put her hands to her hips. We were only trying to help, you know. Your mother and me could fill endless conversations about your negative habits, but we go through the effort about making you seem as appealing as possible. He kept his nonchalant attitude. Why does it matter? It's unimportant whether she likes me or not. The marriage will happen regardless of how we feel about each other. Ino's apparent irritation grew into anger laced with pity. The more she likes you, the better your whole relationship will work out. We are only thinking of your happiness, Shikamaru, but she ran a hand through her hair, you can be a real prick. I'm genuinely starting to feel sorry for Naruto-chan. You better talk with her. About what? She lowered her voice, glancing over to Naruto's direction. Do you remember when you both returned this morning and I started ranting at you? He rolled his eyes. What does that matter? She ignored his retort and resumed to talking unperturbedly. Then she suddenly butted into the conversation by introducing herself. He couldn't see what her point was. She did that to take attention off you, to push you out of the line of the fire. He scrunched up his brows. You're being ridiculous. There was no fire to speak of. You're as always, exaggerating, Ino. But instead of bristling, she shrugged and grinned. Well, there are things that only a woman can't see, I guess. He rolled his eyes again. Alright. Tell me, why would she do that? She shrugged again. Why don't you ask her? Then, she turned to look in the direction of the main street. I've got to go. My mom will kill me. The week passed and everyone fell into a routine. Naruto dissolved her presence of being someone akin to a guest to someone who was part of the Nara household. Every morning, his mother would send Naruto to wake him up, as the girl never slept in as long as he did. She never said that he was cute again, though, for which he was grateful. Then they'd have breakfast, when his mother luckily didn't bug him as much as she used to, as she was busy chattering with Naruto. After that, he lazed around. He knew that Tsunade gave him a break with the missions since she wanted him and his fiancée to get used to their new situation. Meanwhile, the blonde girl started working on her seals and went out to explore Konoha further. Sometimes he accompanied her, sometimes he didn't. He quickly found out that she needed no babysitting and didn't require someone to show her around the whole day. Shikamaru caught himself thinking that if their marriage would be similar to their current situation, he could probably bear with it. This whole thing turned out to be not nearly as troublesome as he'd predicted it to be. One evening, Naruto didn't return when her usual time came around. Concerned, his mother watched the clock. Maybe, she didn't notice how time has passed. That's likely, his father retorted. She seems to be tuning everything else out when she is working with the seals. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. It's not like her to be focused. Shikaku's gaze narrowed on him. Do you know why seal masters are so rare, Shikamaru? The Nara heir shrugged. Fuinjutsu is difficult. No one wants to go through the trouble. His father nodded. The most people who work with seals are only copying them. And even that is hard. Shikamaru raised his brows. Copying is hard. One false ink brush could have fatal outcomes. The fear of possible mistakes, which is legitimate as they very often happen, scares many shinobi away from dealing with Fuinjutsu. Naruto, however, he turned his head to watch the ceiling. Well, I haven't seen it myself, of course, but she is supposed to have surpassed copying long ago. Apparently she is already creating her own ones. Shikamaru sighed and stretched himself. That's why she is working in the woods. She doesn't need the space, but it is dangerous. His father nodded affirmingly. Does that mean she could be hurt as we're speaking? His mother seemed panicked. She turned to him. Shikamaru. Go search for her. Hopefully, she just forgot about time. He stretched himself again and stood up in order to exit the house. As he was on his way to the forest, questions emerged in his head. His father had been unusually informative earlier. The only time he had said something about Naruto was when Shikamaru was 12 and cornered him after the genin exams. This time, he didn't even ask Shikaku for any kind of information, which made the whole ordeal only more suspicious. What was the goal behind his speech? What was it supposed to affect? Shikamaru knew that his father didn't talk for the sake of it and therefore suspected a plan behind their earlier conversation. It is likely that the Nara had wanted to influence his son through what information he provided. Shikamaru went through all of the questions he had concerning Naruto that his father could have wanted to influence. The information concerning Naruto's skills as a sealer were mostly relevant concerning the question why the council desperately wants her in Konoha. It was logical that with not many Fuinjutsu users existing, someone exceptionally talented would be highly desirable. The only problem was that his father would not have told him this fact just like that. Which meant that there was something to hide that he wanted to steer Shikamaru's attention away from. It dawned on him that the Nara had only revealed a little part of the truth in order to satisfy his son's curiosity and thus hide something which was of much greater importance. Something was not right about this matter, but before he could think further about it, he finally spotted Naruto. She was lying on her stomach scribbling pensively, not even noticing his approach. Not wanting her to make a mistake with the seal she was working on, he advanced from behind. Slowly, he lowered his body to the ground so that each knee was resting on the sides of her waist. Then, he stealthily bended over her, and when she paused in her brushing, she quickly moved to grasp her wrists with both hands. He could feel her tensing up and he knew that she was preparing for an attack. Calm down. It's only me. Shikamaru, her voice was oddly high. What are you doing? She seemed upset. You didn't return, so I came to look whether you're still alive. For a moment, Naruto paused as if only realizing how much had passed, then, she seemed to remember something else. So why did you sneak up on me like that? I didn't want you to make a mistake. You didn't notice me approaching, so I thought that startling you could make your hand slip. She pulled her hands out of his grasp and rolled over to lay on her back so that they could see each other's faces now. Her red face was splattered with little blotches of ink. He grinned. You look like a kid after a painting session. There was still a blush on her face, but she grumbled slightly. Hey Shikamaru. I guess I could crawl out, but it would be much easier to stand up if you'd get off me. It was then that Shikamaru truly realized in what position they were. Previously, he only let his ninja instincts work and only thought of an efficient way to alert her of his presence without causing any trouble. But now, he recognized that he was actually leaning over her. Each of his knees were spread to rest on the sides of her body, and although his back was straight now, they were still in a compromising position. Embarrassed, he hurried to stand up slightly stiffly. Right, sorry. It was some days after that when Naruto returned to his room to wake him up. It was past noon, but he had been on a mission the day earlier and only returned very late. Shikamaru. Her voice was only a whisper, as if she wanted to wake but not disturb him. He opened his eyes to see her sitting on the side of the bed with one of her flowery dresses on. Are you sure you're coming? I know you're exhausted from yesterday. It was the day they were supposed to meet for a barbecue to introduce Naruto to the rest of Team 10. He nodded sleepily into his pillow, hardly keeping his eyes open. She smiled faintly and he closed his eyes. Suddenly, he felt additional pressure weighing the bed down. He opened his eyes again only to be confronted with Naruto's face directly staring at his. She was laying on her side, mirroring his position. He was sure that if they lay any nearer to each other, they could have been able to feel the breath of the other. Are you sure? Her voice was still a merciful whisper that didn't grate on his nerves, and he found himself slowly dozing off again. After the short bewilderment of finding her in his bed, he was slowly getting used to her presence. Your hair smells like strawberries. He didn't know why he said that aloud. One moment he was distantly taking in the scent, but for some reason his brain-mouth filter didn't seem to work yet. Is it strong? He shrugged slightly. Not really. But it still could be dangerous on missions. He could hear the smile in her voice. Subtle is not my forte. It made Shikamaru open his eyes a crack to stare into her face. There are people out there waiting to eat little blonde-haired, strawberry-scented girls like you. It made Shikamaru want to point out that she shouldn't be too incautious because he suspected that she was still too naive to grasp the danger that comes with the job of being a ninja. But her smile only widened. Oh, are you concerned? You can be so sweet. He tried to avoid her eyes while his hands itched to play with the gem that he was used to find in his pants pocket. That won't work again. She made an honestly surprised face. What? Saying those things to get me out of bed? Her smile took a teasing tint. I'm not saying that to get you out of bed. I mean it. Shikamaru did his best to ignore her, but Naruto Uzumaki wasn't one to be ignored. Are you one of those guys who don't like being called cute? I don't mean it belittling, you know. But I'll admit that you're handsome, too, if that makes you feel better. Her laughter rang in his ears. He didn't stay in bed for much longer after that. When they arrived at the barbecue place, he could already spot the others sitting at the table, although it wasn't one with 4 seats as usual. He recognized that Ino sat at the window with Choji next to her. At his side was Asuma-sensei, which only left Shikamaru and Naruto to sit at one bench next to each other. He was 100% sure that Ino was responsible for that. He steered towards them with Naruto walking beside him. She wasn't one to hide behind others. Naru-chan. It was Ino who distinguished them first. The others turned curiously to stare in their direction. Hey, Ino-chan. The blonde looked visibly happy. When they arrived at the table, he let Naruto slide in first only to follow her after that. Sagging into his seat, he put his arms on top of the backrest. Guys, that's Naruto. Naruto, those are Choji and Asuma-sensei. You already know Ino. After that he relaxingly leaned back and let his fiancée do the talk while observing everyone. He didn't feel nervous about introducing her to anyone, as she was far better than him in making small talk and making others like her. Shikamaru thought that he could get used to letting her take over the show to let him observe from the sidelines. So, Asuma-sensei began. I'd like to say that Shikamaru told us much about you, but he didn't know anything to tell about. Naruto's face morphed into her trademark foxy grin. Oh, I'm sure he knew more than he talked about. The eyes turned to muster him, but he only shrugged. The light conversations went on while they ate only to be interrupted by the girls going to the restroom together. The men fell into a comfortable silence as soon as Ino and Naruto had left. Asuma-sensei wiggled his eyebrows while grinning smugly in his direction. Seems you had quite a lucky streak there, Shikamaru. He didn't comment, only staring wryly at his teacher, while Choji chuckled softly. The man's grin turned into a smile. You shouldn't let the lady get away. The likes of her aren't easy to find. Shikamaru felt the need to remark that the man was hardly in a position to talk about relationships, as he didn't even have a stable one himself. Furthermore, it really didn't matter what he did, the lady couldn't get away, anyway. Instead he shrugged and confirmed with a quiet yeah, I know. Because he really did know. Naruto had succeeded all his expectations, and he probably couldn't have found a better wife if he tried. Instead of getting the average girl he hoped for, Naruto turned out to be anything but that. She was interesting, friendly, independent and didn't get on his nerves. Objectively seen, you could really call that a lucky streak. Still he asked himself why he didn't feel bothered by her energy, restlessness, ambition and optimism. The fact that he got along with her, although they had not much in common, made him question whether he knew himself as good as he thought he did. It was already late when they decided to head home. Everyone had stayed for much longer than they normally would, probably because it was easy to lose sense of time when Naruto was being entertaining. The stars were clearer that night as he walked beside the blonde girl while she was peacefully humming a song he didn't know. She seemed happy. Naruto? It was the best moment to ask this, and it had been nagging on him since he spoke with Ino. Last week, when you met Ino for the first time and she started ranting, do you remember? She looked up, her blue eyes wide with attention and nodded. You interrupted her suddenly. Did you? He broke himself off, pondering how to word his suspicions. Speaking his thoughts out loud seemed awkward. Did you do that to take the attention of me to push me out of the line of fire? He hoped that using Ino's expressions would get the message across. Naruto's hum died down as she shrugged non-committingly. Her demeanor was unusually shy. Did you? He questioned stubbornly. I felt bad that you had to lie to her because of me. Guilt laced her voice. He halted only for her to stop not long after. You didn't make me do anything. It was my own decision. Her face was doubtful, the face of someone who thought the other was lying for the sake of comforting another. Shikamaru was angry. You're stupid. Here you are, forced into marrying a total stranger you can't help but worry about. Save your pity for yourself. Their features morphed into a harder expression. I may not have your bipedical mind, Shikamaru, but I'm conscious enough to realize that I'm responsible for the situation we're in. He raised an eyebrow, prompting her to continue. You and I don't know much about this whole arrangement, but I'm sure we have both realized something. She wildly gestured around, and Shikamaru was glad that they were in a more abandoned part of town, since the volume she was talking in rose gradually. This marriage was only arranged so that I would come to Konoha. You are being used for that mean. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be stuck in a marriage. Just like in that shogi game of yours, you are being sacrificed as a pawn by the player of the game. Shut up. She startled as his voice was harsher than it intended it to be, but he felt the need to clear the situation up. Did you see it? The contract? I did, and at the end there are the signatures that dictated this arrangement. The Sandaimi's and my father's. They, and the council they represent are the ones responsible. So get those dumb thoughts out of your blonde head, or is your hair color getting to you? Naruto stayed silent, but her eyes were wide and glassy with gratitude. She seemed so little and frail at that moment that it was hard to recognize her from the energetic and optimistic persona she usually showed. He put a hand on her shoulder to push her softly forward. Besides, his voice took a playful tint to disperse the heavy atmosphere. I don't need help from a girl. I'm supposed to be your husband, no. So just let me handle things. Her laugh extinguished what little was left of the oppressive mood. Hey, you're not my husband, yet. And I can handle myself just well. He chuckled. Sure you can. It was that week when Naruto was finally called to the Hokage Tower again. She had been visiting it frequently on her own account to finally get to know the jonin who would be testing her on her skills. But Tsunade always sent her back without an answer. Shikamaru saw that the girl was beginning to get restless, but he didn't have much time to ponder it since he started to receive more missions again. However, there could be only a number of possibilities that would explain why the Hokage's decision took so long. Either the particular jonin she had in mind was on a long mission which enabled the Gon Daimei from informing them, or the ninja declined her request, or is still pondering it. Whatever problem it was, it seemed to have dissolved itself so that Naruto prepared herself to leave the house. As the message from Tsunade came fairly late, she had changed her clothes from her pajamas to something more suitable. Is there a reason you're always wearing dresses? Shikamaru was currently lounging on her bed, watching her from the corner of his eye. It wasn't long ago that he started entering her room, and even less that he nonchalantly began lying on her bed, since it was more comfortable than awkwardly standing around. It felt strange first, but he reasoned that if she took the right to lie in his bed, there would be no mistake in doing the same. Of course he kept his distance when she changed, like earlier. Although they were engaged, he'd feel like a creep watching her in underwear, but apart from that, he didn't think Naruto would even let him watch in the first place. He eyed his surroundings absent-mindedly. The room looked vastly different from his. Where his was functional and classic, hers was colorful and creative. They're comfortable, she noted absent-mindedly. Shikamaru turned on his side, leaning his head on his arm as he watched her fussing with the dark blue hem. Then she sat on the floor, leaning on the side of the bed. Can you close the zipper? He sat up, brushing her long hair away to get access to her back. The blonde locks felt soft, he noted. Suits you, he murmured. Blue went nice with Naruto. She turned around, her eyes wide with excitement. You think so? He didn't answer. Actually, I'm wearing dresses because they're a little easier to pull off. He raised a brow at the mirror that was standing in front of them. In there, he could watch her reflection. I'm a little clueless when it comes to fashion. But I feel like there is less you can do wrong when your clothing consists of only one piece. She scratched her head in a slightly embarrassed manner which Shikamaru found oddly charming. At going then? Are you sure you don't need me to come with you? Actually, he was comfortable sitting where he was, but he was willing to move if Naruto needed him to. Actually, he was curious about what Tsunade would tell the girl, as he didn't have loads of information on the blonde himself. However, he didn't have a doubt that the Hokage did. After all, she needed to know who is going to come in her village and who she will entrust with secretive and valuable information. Alone the choice of the Jonin testing Naruto would give Shikamaru further information because the Gon Daime wouldn't just select someone random. Shinobi matter was serious and he was a strong believer of always bepising decisions. Yet if he would accompany Naruto too often, Tsunade would get wind of it and suspect his behavior. Although he wasn't really doing anything wrong or forbidden, he'd rather not be on the radar of that terror woman known as Senju Tsunade. So he'd only have an excuse if Naruto asked him to come with her. But she rose and turned around, now to look him in his real face and not his reflection on the mirror. You just came back from a mission. You should rest. He smirked and his voice took a teasing tint. I don't know. It's already late and I shouldn't let a young lady walk through the streets alone at this time of the night. Of course, it was a load of bull, but it still made her bristle and her face morph into a determined expression. Hey, I can take care of myself. Don't belittle me. Her offended tone provoked a short laugh from him. I think you're late already. That comment made her hurry up and gather her things, muttering curses while hurrying out of the room. When he slowly woke up, the distant scent of strawberries penetrated his senses. Confused, he opened his eyes. The pillow he was resting his head on wasn't his. Nor were the covers or the room for that matter. Apparently, he must have fallen asleep while lying on Naruto's bed yesterday night, since he had been too lazy to move to his own. As his senses grew sharper, he noticed that he lied under the covers, although he had been lying on top of them the previous night, which meant that someone must have tucked him in. Furthermore, his vest had been removed, making him more comfortable. In spite of wanting to doze further, he couldn't stop himself from wondering where Naruto was sleeping when he was in her bed. Tiredly, he sat up, stretched himself, and rose to move in the direction of his room. After a short walk, he opened the door only to spot blonde hair spread across his pillows. Even in her sleeping form, Naruto's presence gave the plain room a splash of color. He moved and laid himself on top of the covers beside her. She must have come back that night only to see him in her bed, so that she decided to sleep in his instead. Blue orbs opened hesitantly and took him in. How's the bed? Comfortable? Her scratchy voice sounded funny when she had just woken up. You could have woken me up. I accidentally fell asleep yesterday. It was what an average person in her position would have done, but average seemed to be the complete opposite of Naruto Uzumaki. She closed her eyes again and he mimicked her in doing so. It was a little too early to be talking. You needed rest. No big deal, I just took your bed instead. There was silence, and Shikamaru absently noted that she probably fell asleep again. It didn't take him long to follow her. That was why he was awoken some hours later, but not by Naruto's gentle hand like he had grown used to, but by rushing and scuffling from the floor. There was a loud bang of his door being slammed open only to be followed by his mother's noisy, panicked voice. Shikamaru, wake up. Have you seen? She broke off and he cracked an eye open. The Nara matriarch was frozenly standing in the middle of his room and befuddledly stared at the blonde girl that was sleeping next to him. He briefly wondered how late she returned last night since she was still out cold, but his thoughts were interrupted by his mother's stammering. Shikamaru could have smirked smugly since he couldn't recall a time his mother had been reduced to that. Only a moment later he realized the cause of her surprise. Him and Naruto lying in the same bed. Tiredly, he groaned. It was still too early to bepize the situation, and at this hour of the day he really couldn't care about being found in a compromising position. They were engaged for God's sake. That meant they should be able to do whatever the hell they wanted. Clumsy from sleep, he stifled his face in his pillow, trying to go back into slumber. He was out before his mother could exit the room. When they both woke up it was almost noon, which aggravated Naruto, since she didn't like wasting time sleeping wherever that philosophy had come from. It was one of her traits that he didn't even want to understand, as it was so averse to his being that he couldn't be expected to comprehend it. Apparently, his mother hadn't bothered to wake them up, which meant that they had missed breakfast. When he entered the kitchen, he could see Yoshino through the window, tending to the garden. Naruto came not soon after with her hair still wet from the shower she took. Damn, we missed breakfast. She sounded positively heartbroken. We should sleep more often in the same bed if that means she'll let me sleep in. Naruto rolled her eyes at his comment and laughed it off with a "you wish." Then she put her hands up to her hips and looked through the light-flooded kitchen. "Well, I guess we'll take breakfast into our own hands." Shikamaru took that moment to start a proper conversation, so the amount of work he had to provide would be reduced to a minimum. Yes, he didn't dislike Naruto, but it would take her a hell of a lot more to get him to help in the kitchen on his free will. Not if he could evade it. So? What did the Hokage say yesterday? Sure enough, the girl started to work on autopilot while going through practiced movements. All the arrangements stand. I will meet the guy who'll test me the day after tomorrow on training ground 7. Has she mentioned a name? Naruto's voice was absent as she hurried through the kitchen and cracked some eggs into a pan that sizzled with butter. Nope. Though it appeared by the way she talked that the jonin was male. She opened cupboards and shelves in a hurry and put 2 sets of dishes on the table which he was sitting at. I don't even know whether I'll be doing the test with others or just by myself. Somewhere along the way she had tied an apron on which she took off now to present the results of her short cooking session. Tada. Naruto Uzumaki's extra fluffy omelette. She sat down in front of him and they started to eat. It's good, he noted. It really was, and Shikamaru did not only claim that for Naruto's sake, although he had come to experience that Naruto soaked up compliments up like a sponge. This time was no different and her eyes shone as he thanked him. When she did that, she seemed honestly surprised and grateful, which made Shikamaru want to know which kind of life she led to make her react the way she did. Hey Shikamaru. He looked up from his food to face her in order to prompt her to speak on. Do you know the Hyugas? He raised a brow, wondering where that topic suddenly came from. Were you asking? Suddenly, his ninja instincts kicked in and his mind started its beepizing process. It alerted his senses and made him remember the suspicions he had about Naruto before he had met her. The probability of her being a spy who sold out information about Konoha was high enough to be considered, and the sudden question about one of the most influential, powerful and secretive clans in the village threw him off and did nothing to ease his worries concerning her intentions. These thoughts hit him like a brick and made him realize that he hadn't properly entertained them for a long time. Since he had met Naruto, in fact. Shikamaru questioned whether Naruto had skillfully lulled him into a charade of a comfy and domestic life. If she did, she had made a damn good job. And all the time he'd been with her, he never really entertained serious concerns about her intentions. Instead, he tried to dissect what quality of hers made her so unnerving. The fact that he had lost a grip on his objective distanced beepizing skills, his most important weapon, made him hyper-aware. Immediately, he dissociated himself from the situation and started playing with the green gem in his pocket. He had to keep his cool. That's why Shikamaru forced himself to ignore all the time they spent together in order to being able to view her like he would have had any other person. Apparently oblivious to the sudden change in atmosphere, or was that an act? Naruto only sighed exasperatedly. It's almost impossible to get Hinata-chan out of the house. And I just have a feeling that it has something to do with her family. Don't seem suspicious. Pry her motives out of her. Carefully, while flinging the stone in his pocket through thumb and forefinger, he deadpanned her statement with a mere glance. You should base your theories on more than just your female intuition. She bristled. Hey. My theories are based on more than. He rolled his eyes and interrupted her. Anyway, you're right. It was no big deal. There would be no harm telling her, or anyone for that matter, that the Hyuga didn't have much free time due to her position in her clan. If Naruto was a spy, which he honestly couldn't tell at the moment, he could give her useless information so that she would still consider him to be ignorant of her motives. If she had any. Did she? His instincts and his mind fought against each other, but the mind didn't gain the upper hand as it usually did. He was undecided and confused, something abnormal for him. Goddamn Naruto Uzumaki for doing whatever she did to him that got him so caught up. His sharp eyes focused on the blonde girl. Even when we were in academy, she didn't do much with the rest of her classmates. Her family had great part in that. Why would they do that? Naruto's blue orbs were deeply attentive. A Hyuga or a little. He paused, pondering how to word it in order not to tell too much strict. They spend loads of time training. On top of that, Hinata is the clan heir. That clan is picky about who to converse with anyway, so they wouldn't just let her make friends with whomever she wanted. No valuable information. The Hyuga are known for these traits, and they would be of no use for an enemy. And how are the Naras and the Hyuga getting along? Naruto seemed to be thinking hardly, thus did not notice how much the question nagged on him, because that information could be used when planning attacks. If the enemy would get to know about 2 extremely influential clans in Konoha probably not having a good relationship, they could use that fact to search for weak links in the groups to animate a fight against each other. It was incredibly smart, too. You didn't even need to get your hands dirty. You just brought big and important families against each other and thus initiated a little version of a civil war. That would weaken both clans and therefore Konoha, too. Was Naruto planning on doing that? He searched her face for any sign that would inform him, but there was none. Well, better play safe and bluff a little. Great. The Naras and Hyugas get along splendidly. We work together on every opportunity. That statement was so exaggerated that it might as well have been a lie. The clans had an alright relationship. The Naras thought the others to be too uptight, the Hyugas believed his clan to be too undisciplined. Yet both families didn't see it as any of their business, and there was a mutual respect for their respective skills. But it was better to pretend that the families were strong partners in case enemies wanted to provoke a fight between them. Really? Naruto seemed elated at that fact, something that he hadn't expected. The reaction seemed too honest to belong to an enemy who'd wished the exact opposite of what Shikamaru just told her. Can you accompany me this evening to the Hyuga compound then? His confusion only grew. What for? Naruto's shine didn't falter. Well, since I've arrived in Konoha, I spend lots of time with Hinata-chan, right? Not as much as I would have liked to, but enough for her father to want to get to know me better. That's why they invited me for dinner this evening. A reasonable request, seeing as it comes from the controlling Hyuga head. And what's my role in that? Shikamaru knew that Naruto didn't need anyone to hold her hand while making conversation, not even when she spoke to powerful men like Hiashi Hyuga. Hinata said that her father would like you to come if you weren't otherwise occupied, and since you said your clans have a good relationship, I thought I could make an even better impression with you. He could follow her explanation, and even considering the clan's true relationship, it was a pretty good plan. The only obstacle was the fact that Shikamaru didn't want to do anything less than meeting up with the Hyugas for dinner. As he never spoke more than a few words with either of them, Hinata and Neji included, he harbored no interest in putting himself in a doubtlessly energy-consuming situation. No. Naruto's features fell all of a sudden, and he almost felt guilty for spoiling her good mood. But why? I just don't want to. Her eyes widened and bored into his. Please, Shikamaru. It'd be so much more fun with you. He creased his brows because he knew he was no jester you could have casually incredible amounts of fun with. Not that he himself had a problem with it. Come on, I'd owe you something. How can I know that I can trust you? He didn't mean to slip that, but he did. The least he could do was go with it. What do you mean? She seemed confused. Good, let her get a taste of her own medicine. I could do you a favor, but how can I know that I get repaid? How can I trust you? This particular question was only a placeholder for another one. What he actually wanted to ask was whether he could trust her not to cause any harm towards Konoha, but obviously, he couldn't just ask that directly. Shikamaru expected her to react hurt or confused and to deny his allegations, as it would have been both reasonable if she was innocent or guilty. Then he asked himself when he would finally stop expecting anything from Naruto, because she did not display the emotions that any other person would have. Instead, she grinned in that inimitable foxy way of hers. However, at the moment, her expression seemed even fiercer than usual. It made him slip the moss agate quickly through nimble fingers, careful to keep a stoic expression. Undeterred, Naruto bearded her forearms on the table, leaning so that her upper part of the body hovered above it as she approached him slowly. Eventually her face stopped, but she was so near that he could feel her breath faintly on his own face. In the back of his mind, he noticed how Naruto's cleavage was in clear view, but he denied himself from getting unnerved by that, at least visibly. That's why he settled on the blue orbs, anticipation burning in him. But his eyes couldn't keep her gaze as she neared his left ear till her mouth was right next to it and he could feel her breath much stronger now. I guess you can't. Shikamaru turned his head and there was only a hair's breadth of a distance between them. Two could play one game, and although he was currently behind because he didn't even realize they were playing, he planned on changing on that. He was the last person to be considered competitive, but somehow he refused to be undermined by Naruto Uzumaki. Somewhere in his head, a part of his mind asked him whether he wanted to prove something, and whether he wanted to prove it to himself or his fiancée, but he ignored it. Undeterred, he kept a perfect poker face on and stared into her impossibly sea blue eyes. You can't ever know whether you can trust me unless you find out for yourself. It was a challenge, a lure. Seduction. This evening. At 7. It's a date. He smirked. Yes, two can play a game. Naruto-san, is it possible for you to practice your sealing skills in Konoha? I know that we do not have any sealing masters who would be able to teach you. Oh, that's alright. More often than not, I'm practicing on my own anyway. It's not like there are many seal masters anywhere. That's how it had been all evening long, and by now, Shikamaru was convinced that Hiashi Hyuga invited Naruto only over to interrogate her properly. Sure, he did it carefully, without being too obvious, but Shikamaru saw it as what it was. Although the blonde girl managed to bring lightheartedness with her being into the conversation, everything involving the Hyuga clan seemed to be covered in tense atmosphere that not even his fiancée could fully penetrate. "I see your father is faring well, Shikamaru-san." He seemed to be elated about his future daughter-in-law. He was glad that he was at least half-heartedly paying attention, or else he would have missed the clan head's comment. Although he would really have loved to shut the man out, the older frequently spoke to him as well. Whether it was because Hiashi didn't want to appear rude or whether he truly wanted to talk with him, Shikamaru didn't know. "Yes, my parents are very fond of Naruto," said girl, and even Hinata giggled at that, which caused him to shortly look at his fiancée who was sitting beside him. She was wearing a dress that was unusually subdued. It wasn't flowy or flowery like normal, but rather straight, simple but still a little elegant. Her claiming not to know much about fashion, she had surely chosen the right clothes for a Hyuga dinner. The rest of the dinner proceeded in the same manner, and Shikamaru asked himself how he would ever handle these stuck-up Hyugas if his future wife wouldn't be there with him. However, somewhere along the way, Naruto excused herself to go to the bathroom. Surprisingly, Hiashi asked Hinata to show her friend the training grounds after that. Both were so happy about spending some time with each other that they probably didn't harbor the same concerns that he did. Yet, Naruto laid a hand on his and looked at him meaningfully, as if to ask, "Will you be alright?" She has noticed how tense he had been all evening. He nodded shortly. Shikamaru would rather have her with him, but he knew that he couldn't just keep her when the clan head had offered for Hinata to show her around. Besides, although the Hyuga obviously wasn't someone to casually hang out with, the Nara heir had handled far worse people on both missions and on his free time. "I am glad that you have joined my invitation for this evening, Shikamaru-san," Hiashi said once the girls were gone. "So am I," he lied skillfully. It wasn't like he harbored any kind of dislike against the man or the Hyugas in general, he just knew better ways to spend his time. "Really? I was almost convinced that you wouldn't come." So the man would finally slip the polite facade and tell what he really had in mind. "Naruto convinced me. Their relationship seems harmonic." "Yeah, that was maybe a way to describe it. I must confess that I respect you for taking part in this agreement without causing further difficulties." Shikamaru knew that the agreement didn't refer to this dinner anymore, but rather to the marriage as a whole. He nodded, acknowledging what the man said. "It's not like Naruto or he had a big choice in that matter. I also recognize your father's decision in that matter. It certainly wasn't an easy way to go." Shikamaru started to suspect that the girl's departure wasn't because Hiashi wanted to give them alone time, but rather for him to speak with Shikamaru. He raised a brow in order for the man to just spit out what he wanted to ask. Hiashi smiled. "You're just as perceptive as your father, Shikamaru-san." Having realized that all pretenses were dropped, he dared to ask the question which had been bothering him all evening. "So was this evening's purpose to interrogate Naruto, or me?" The man's smile turned into a sly expression. "Both, I suppose." "And your assessment?" "Concerning Naruto, good enough. She seems like an honest girl." Somehow, Shikamaru was glad that Hiashi thought that. It was one more experienced and smart ninja who thought that his fiancée could be trusted. It never hurt to have an additional opinion. "But I never tried to interrogate you, Shikamaru-san." He didn't answer, silently prodding the man to continue. "I know our clans have not been very close in the past, but I believe that not only our families but Konoha also would benefit from working together." The Hyuga head inhaled deeply. "I know that we currently live in times of peace, however, sometimes these years only mark the period between two wars. In case that war arrives, it is important for our shinobi to work together as much as they can to ensure our home's safety." Shikamaru nodded. "So this was all about a political matter. That is why I desire the future generations to be close." Shikamaru understood what lay behind the man's words. If the clan heads worked together, the rest of the families were bound to do the same. Yet, this hadn't mattered not long ago, as Hinata and he had close to no contact, but it had changed when Naruto stepped into the game. Although she wasn't in charge of the Naras, of course, in the future her authority could only be undermined through him once he was the clan head. Furthermore, Naruto already had so much of an influence on him that she found herself in a pretty powerful position. If she would work together with the Hyugas, so would he. When they arrived home, Naruto departed to her room unusually quickly to get all the sleep she could get for tomorrow's test. He, however, was too lazy to take a shower yet and lounged in the living room. When his father entered it, he sat in front of him, a grin plastered on his face. "So? How was your first diplomatic conversation?" Shikamaru allowed himself to glare. "You knew he'd be doing that. Why else would he invite you over?" Shikamaru didn't know whether to be amazed about his father's political skills or whether to be angry about not being informed about what awaited him. So he settled on both. "You could have warned me." "Oh, but you have to prepare yourself for things like that in the future." I never pressured you about your duties as the future clan head, but you'll eventually have to learn them. The younger male rolled his eyes. You only want me to do all the work. In response to that, the grin turned into a smirk. Of course. I'm looking forward for an early retirement. He was about to hypocritically retort about what a lazy ass his father was being when his mother suddenly appeared on the door swell. She seemed to be drying dishes, a plate still in her hand and a frown in her face as she spoke up. You rather not say things like that or you'll be an already worse example than you have been. Shikamaru has probably already taken that comment as an advice. Dryly, Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. I'm only the clan heir and will stay that for a while. At the moment I wasn't even thinking about ditching my duties to my kids, although it does sound tempting. Ishino laughed humorlessly. Oh really? Don't pretend to be clueless, Shikamaru, because what I found today looked like you were thinking of having children far sooner than any of us would have imagined. His father turned to look at him interestedly, but Shikamaru was shocked speechless. What the hell are you implying? However, Yoshino only rolled her eyes. Please, don't act as if you don't know exactly what I mean. Then, she turned solely to her husband, almost completely dismissing her son. Shikaku, imagine what happened this morning. I, completely naive, go into Naruto's room because she hasn't woken up as early as she normally would. But when I entered, she wasn't in her bed. So I thought that she may be already up, but although I searched almost the whole compound for her, I couldn't find her. Slowly, I was starting to panic that she has ran away or something, and how she moved to Shikamaru pointing with the plate still in her hand in his direction. How are we going to find someone like her for Shikamaru again? Anyway, his father interrupted curiously. So, where was I? Scared like I haven't been for a long time, I stormed into his room, only to find Naruto and him, lying side by side, in the same bed. Now she fully turned him, hand stemmed to her hips. Now, I'm from the last generation, but I know exactly what that means. Shikamaru only just recovered from his speechlessness to interrupt her hurriedly. But that wasn't what it looked like. He almost winced at how cliché and guilty it sounded. Quickly, he looked for a way to explain himself. I just accidentally fell asleep in her bed, so she went to sleep in mine, and I searched for her, and somehow dozed off with her, and abruptly, he interrupted himself when he noticed that it didn't sound quite as innocent as he thought it would. But it had been completely innocent, or hadn't it? However, his thoughts were interrupted by his father's heavy exhale. Hesitantly, the man fixed his eyes on him. Son, I know that Naruto is a pretty girl, and that at your age you must be curious too. This must have been the most mortifying moment of his life, and so entirely embarrassing that it made the blood shoot up in his face. Knowing about sex is one thing, but having your parents talk about it to you was probably the worst trauma he was about to experience. No, that was honestly, I really mean it, not what it looked like. His mother rolled her eyes and groaned. Fine. Let's pretend that she motioned quotation marks it wasn't what it looked like if that makes you feel better. But that doesn't change the fact that you have to be informed, his father seamlessly closed the statement. Who knew that his parents could be such a good team when it came to ganging up on him? I just said that. Still his father interrupted, raising his hand, as if to halt him. Those actions have to be considered well, as you're both still young. Very young, his mother added and nodded. However, I do know that teenagers often don't consider their parents' warnings, but if you have to do it, and that was the moment Shikamaru honest to God considered simply running out of the room, you have to be careful. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing against grandchildren. Absolutely nothing, his mother interrupted. But and that's when Shikamaru stood up, ready to bolt. Alright, no grandchildren, I get it. Clearly, his parents were adamant about not listening to him, so it was probably easier to give in. Quickly, he exited the room. He really needed no more of that. The next morning Naruto didn't wake him up again, and he vaguely remembered that today she was going to be tested in order to become a ninja. Kakashi Hatake had never known much about Naruto Uzumaki, not even that her last name was Uzumaki. Although he had figured that officially, she wouldn't be called by her father's surname, he hadn't bothered finding out what she was named. Instead, he tried to ignore her presence since she was born, or rather, since Minato-sensei has died. That man had been so important to him that he had not only become a teacher and a friend, but also some kind of father figure. That was why his death hurt so much, which drove him to shut out everything concerning him. So Kakashi acted as if he didn't take notice of his sensei's daughter. Somewhere along, he noted that she had been sent away, for he never saw her in Konoha again. At that time, the Sandaime had called him to tell about her whereabouts and her moving to Yuzu. The third Hokage had asked him whether he would like to take over the job as one of her guards who should watch over her. He hadn't needed a second to decline. Over the years, he was called in regularly and asked whether he had changed his mind over that matter. He didn't. Although Kakashi matured and dealt better with the pain as time passed, the scars never really healed. But he improved in other aspects of his life and got more social in general. That particularly started after he finally let Team 7 pass and found himself in regular contact with those kids. Often he considered his students to be the hardest to teach, and maybe that was the reason he even let them pass. However, he quickly learned that many children, not only the uchiha of his team or he himself, when he had been little, were troubled, and every one of them has their own pack to carry. That particular fact stuck to him when he had been lounging with the other Jonin senseis while waiting for their students to hopefully pass their Chunin exams. Asuma had been lazily sitting in the sofa, cigarette in his mouth, and watching the woods through the window. "They're growing up so fast," was what he said. Kurenai had laughed at that. "You're almost acting like you're their father or something." But Kakashi had known how much of a father figure a sensei could be, so he chose not to comment on that. "One of my kids," Asuma sighed, smoke exhaling, "has to grow up so fast. We'll be married in less than 5 years. Kurenai had raised her eyebrows, but she didn't look surprised. "You mean the Nara heir?" Kakashi had been vaguely confused about the Nara clan arranging marriages, but hadn't spent much time pondering it. He had had enough problems on his own. Little did he know that the Nara heir's fiancée would become his problem soon enough. Precisely 4 years after that conversation, when the Gon Daimei had called him to her office. The look on her face had been serious. "I don't know if you kept up with the gossip, but Shikaka's future daughter-in-law has arrived in Konoha." Kakashi only shook his head. He really couldn't care less about the marriage arrangements of the Nara clan. "She has the potential to become a formidable ninja, and not only me, but also the council, want to take her among our ranks." He slowly realized where this conversation was leading to. "I want you to test her skills and determine whether she is fit for that." Under his mask, he had frowned, as he didn't understand why the Hokage had chosen him to do the job. He had only ever taught one team, which didn't result in, let's say, fantastic results. Furthermore, he had so many problems with himself, he barely could be the guiding teacher figure a student needed. Although he knew he wasn't horrible, there were certainly better people to take that job on. "I don't do single students. They can't learn about teamwork if they work on their own. For the beginning, I only want you to test her and determine whether she should become a Konoha shinobi or not. You can take a couple of genins or chunins to take part so you can see how well she works in a team." There still was something fishy about that offer, but he had accepted. Just as he was leaving her office, Tsunade's voice stopped him. "And keep your eyes open." He had raised his eyebrows, not that it could be seen with the mask and the headband on. "I don't say she can't be trusted, and she seems genuine enough, but she had sighed. Fact is that we don't know her well enough. Her previous teacher assured me of her loyalties, but I know him, and even he can be wrong. The chances are really slim, but I'll just say that for you to stay alert." Her mouth had morphed into a smile. "Although I already know you will be. Why not have Anbus tail her if you aren't completely sure of her motives? Meet her at Friday. Which training ground do you prefer?" she had asked instead, ignoring his question. So Kakashi had figured that it was none of his business and kept in mind to be alert around the girl. However, he still considered it to be an unimportant matter and only later remembered that he not even knew the girl's name. Now he was beating himself up over it and swore to never be as easygoing like that again. Because when Friday had arrived and he had appeared on training ground 2 hours late, he knew that he had been lured into a trap. The first thing he noticed was bright sunny blonde hair of a shade that he had only seen on only one other person before. Suspicion immediately crept up on him, but he had briefly dared to hope. And then she had turned around and all the hope went into the drain. Because those eyes on top of that hair made it clear as water who exactly she was. She fixed him with the eyes of Minato-sensei, a slightly annoyed look on her face. "You're late." Although he had heard that line countless times in his life already, a handy excuse didn't come to his mind this time around. Instead, there was a moment of silence, which he broke through. "You must be Naruto," as if had been informed of who she was. The last ray of hope died down when she nodded in affirmation. "Uzumaki for now. Will most probably change soon." She shrugged. "And you are?" Kakashi hot Aki. She seemed excited, earlier anger forgotten. "Are you going to be my new sensei? I'm testing you today. We'll see about what comes after that." They were interrupted by the sound of children bickering. Out of the corner of his eye he could spot the Sandaimi's grandson with the usual friends he was hanging out with. After that meeting with Tsunade, he had asked for her to send a genin team at the date he'd be testing Naruto to properly judge her teamwork skills. "Hey you. You're the new girl, aren't you? Shikamaru's woman." It was the loud kid. What was his name? Something with Konoha in it. "Woman? I'm his fiancé, you runt. Hey, it's not like you're so much taller." The boy was right. Naruto, as much as he tried to ignore her, was short and the kid who was doing the talking would probably grow to be taller than she was. "I don't need height to kick your ass." So she had Kushina sense fire, then. Somehow, Kakashi wished it had been the other way around, that Naruto had looked like her mother and had her father's personality, since the physical appearance stuck out than the character. At least on first glance. Maybe then, it wouldn't hurt so much to merely look at the Uzumaki. Hey, do you know who I am? Konoha something bristled. You could be the Hokage and I wouldn't care, she said dismissively, head held high. Today, you are my teammate, right? He could spot her turn to Kakashi, although he tried to avoid her eyes, her entire being. Yes, he replied. Let's get this over with. You four are a team today. For he pointedly looked at the Genin's, it will be extra training. Then he turned away. Naruto, you also know what this means to you. She nodded. Your mission will be something rather classic. It's called the bell test. He explained the rules, although he had brought 3 bells with him than only the usual 2. This test would be mean towards Naruto, and he knew it. The Genin team was told that they'd receive higher ranked missions if they passed Kakashi's test. Of course, they didn't know the actual criteria they were tested on, and therefore, would work as a team, but only among themselves. They would try to shut Naruto out, although in this scenario, she was supposed to be part of the team. Those were difficult circumstances for the girl to deal with, but since she was older and had probably more experience than the average academy graduate, he had higher expectations. After all, you couldn't always stand the people you were on a mission with, either. When he counted down to 0, all 3 vanished from his sight. After hiding behind the many trees that she still hadn't got quite used to, for only a short amount of time, it didn't take long for Naruto to spot the kid who had rudely dismissed her as Shikamaru's woman. In between the hot Aki guy who had been 2 damn hours too late and that boy who'd really need to learn how to speak to girls if he ever wanted to get a girlfriend, Shikamaru really was the finest gentleman. She sighed silently. If her fiancé had been here, he probably already would have developed a waterproof plan how to handle this test. She, on the other hand, was rather one to act and not to be-pie situations to their last detail. But since the kids who she had to work with didn't appear to be making plans either, she guessed she had to take on the job. While watching the boy with a long scarf trying and failing to get the bells from Hot Aki, she pondered about this test. It could have easily been done without the children. The Jonin could have brought only 1 bell and assigned her to try to get it in a certain time frame. But since the Genins were invited over, it meant that they had to serve some kind of purpose. Since this test was supposed to show off her skills, she could only guess that she should demonstrate how well she could work with them, even if their leader seemed to be a little rude dumbus. But she recognized the stubborn ones once she saw them. After all, she was one of them. Apart from being otherwise occupied with being beaten up, the scarf boy probably wouldn't be easily convinced to work with her. Which meant she first had to meet up with the 2 others. Naruto grinned. Shikamaru would have been proud of her assessment. It only took her an embarrassingly short amount of time to notice where the little girl was hiding. She looked at war with herself, probably fighting the urge to step into the fight between the boy and Hot Aki. Hey. The girl startled and quickly turned around. I'm Naruto. She looked confused and Naruto could admit that it was probably not the best moment to make introductions, but they somehow had to get this whole thing rolling. I'm Mogi. Her voice was quiet and hesitant. The blonde decided to get straight to the point. Listen Mogi-chan, she whispered affectionately, why don't we search for the glasses boy and then gather Scarf Boy to work together on getting the bells. Naruto actually believed that she could gather the bells without their help. It was not a matter of arrogance, but rather one of realistic assessment. Although Hot Aki would undoubtedly be strong, she had the element of surprise to work with. In the past, it used to bother her to be seen as a weak little girl, but she had come to realize that her appearance gave her a terrific advantage in battles. I don't know. The girl sighed and tried to avoid Naruto's penetrative glance. There are only 3 bells, and without meaning any offense, if I had them, I would give them to my teammates. That's alright. We'll gather the bells together, I don't care who gets them at the end. Mogi's eyes widened. How do I know that you're telling the truth? The blonde could only grin brightly in response. Konoha's people sure were a distrustful bunch. You don't. But you don't really have much of a choice, either. The genin seemed to be thinking hard and turned to the scarf boy who was now lying on the ground before Hot Aki, who didn't even have a strand of hair out of place. Alright, she answered, let's go look for Yuden-kun. It didn't take them long to find the glasses boy, whose name was supposedly Yuden. And they say her name was weird. With Mogi on her side, it didn't take her long to persuade him, either. Now came the hard one. Alright, first we have to get your friend out of that fight, since he doesn't seem to be planning to leave it on his own accord, soon. Although Scarf Boy's antics were hopelessly futile, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him when she noticed how hard he was trying. His name's Konohamaru, sniffled Yuden. But he won't stop even if we ask him to, Mogi added. Then we won't ask. We'll go and get him. She put her fingers together in an all too familiar sign and produced two doppelgangers with a quiet Kagebunshi no Jutsu. Confused, the kids watched the doppelgangers put a henge on so that there were two Mochis and two Yuden standing in the woods. What are you doing? We'll get Konohamaru-kun. It shouldn't be too hard since Hot Aki-san isn't paying much attention anyways. But to be sure, I'll send the Kagebunshins over. Just as she finished her sentence, the doppelgangers started running to the bare field in a pace that wouldn't seem suspicious. It didn't take them long to grasp Scarf Boy's arms and pull him back in between the trees. Hot Aki watched everything in disinterest and turned to read the book in his hands again. What the hell? Hey, I'm Naruto, she interrupted. The Scarf Boy looked momentarily confused and for the lack of a better thing to say he grunted, Konohamaru. Want to work together? In response, the boy rolled his eyes as if he was standing before the dimmest person ever. Unless you haven't noticed, woman, there are only 3 bells. Which we will get. I'm okay with that. Now he looked like he seriously feared for her intelligence. Do you think we're stupid? Think twice who you're trying to trick. I mean it. We'll get the bells together, but you can keep them at the end. How can I know that I can believe you? She laughed silently. You can't. But at the end of this, you'll know whether I'm trustable. That will be important in the future. Kakashi was seeing the words in his book but wasn't really reading them. Although his body posture wouldn't betray it, his nerves were on edge with the knowledge that behind one of these trees, his sensei's daughter was hiding and plotting. It was exciting. However, he didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed when the Sandaimi's grandson was the first one to attack him. Easily, he fended him off till the other kids of his team collected him. Naruto still hadn't made an appearance. Then, after approximately 10 minutes, the Genin team ran out of the trees in his direction. Kakashi was glad that some kind of teamwork came into this whole test, but unfortunately, the one who should be tested wasn't participating in the teamwork. The kids started hitting him from all directions, and he had to admit that they knew pretty well how to work together. In fact, if Naruto would have worked with them, they could have had a decent chance at gaining the bells, but the girl was nowhere to be seen. To remain entertained, he occasionally let them brush the bells to let them think they were close to reaching their goal. He was just about to kick the Konoha boy when he suddenly couldn't move his left foot anymore. Befuddled, he stared at his foot, which was seemingly held by the Genin's team leader. But Kakashi knew that it was impossible for that kid to hold him in place. Not having much time to ponder it, as the girl and the other boy started attacking again, he started fighting on his place. He could easily stand 100 of them even if both of legs were bound. However, as soon as his hands made contact with their little ones, he couldn't move them either. Confused, he stared at them. Due to them holding him, the kids couldn't move either, but that was unimportant. The question was how the hell they managed to hold him in the first place. As he couldn't develop a solution, he tried pulling harder and harder to get rid of their hands. Damn kids had shit-eating grins on their faces. He was just about to retort that whatever they had done wasn't going to help them anytime soon, as they couldn't move themselves without letting him go, when Naruto stepped out of the woods. She was smiling and calmly walking into their direction. How far can you move? Her question suggested that she had her hand in the present situation. So he didn't answer. It'll be good to know, for, let's say, scientific research. I've never tested those seals' life, so it'd be interesting to know. I'll bet you can move a little though, right? She was right, he could move his limbs slightly, and if he put very much chakra into it, he could probably free them too, but his mind had stopped working properly when she mentioned the word seals. They're still being tested, and I didn't want to cause damage in case they wouldn't work, so I only seeped little amounts of chakra into them. By now, she had arrived in front of Kakashi and easily plucked the bells of his belt. Lightly, she touched each of the kids' hands and gave them each one bell, after not only them, but he, too, could finally move away again. Their palms were smeared with ink. Having forgotten the purpose of the test, he grabbed a wrist of the boy with the glasses, but although they were dirty like the kid just had a painting session, there were no distinctive signs drawn. You wouldn't see anything. I add that little extra to every one of my little babies. Naruto's hands were stemmed to her hips, the smile, which resembled Sensei Minato so much, never left her face. I can get very possessive of them, you know. Wouldn't want them to be copied. Kakashi let go of the boy's hand and focused his whole attention on the blonde girl standing before him. He didn't pretend that she didn't pass because her giving the bells away proved that she had already understood the test's purpose. Instead, he seized into his pouch and pulled out a hit I-8. Congrats. You're officially one of Konoha's Kunoichis now. Her eyes widened up like the ones of a little child having gotten a precious present. Gingerly, she received the headband and knotted it behind her head so it was covering her forehead. That's so cool. I always wanted to have one. She looked upwards as if wanting to see the hit I-8 that was now protecting her forehead. Thanks, Hata. Call me Sensei Kakashi. She seemed confused. Sensei? Yes, was the only thing he replied. Tsunade already owed him one for deceiving him, so the least she could do was assign Naruto to him as a student. Besides, he was pretty sure that the Hokage was planning on doing that anyway. Once he had met the girl, he couldn't just let her go. I can admit that I underestimated you this time. But you still can learn a lot of me. I'm sure of that. She laughed loudly. Hey. It was Konoha something's voice. He pointed with a finger on the older girl, a bright grin on his face. Okay, you're not only Shikamaru's woman, you're badass and can be trusted. Just wait. I'll beat you, boss. Naruto only laughed more. Boss. But the children were already running away to God knows where with the boy, Konohamaru. Kakashi suddenly remembered, still yelling something towards her. Suits you. He turned around to spot the Naruto lazily sitting on a tree branch, a soft grin on his face. Kakashi had already felt him approaching about the time Konohamaru started his little speech. Do you really think so? Naruto seemed to brighten up when she saw his face, her smile and her eyes wider. They somehow looked every little bit like the engaged couple they were supposed to be, although they hadn't known each other for a long time. The boy went over to her and ruffled her hair. Didn't I just tell you that? Hey, my hair is already a mess. What did you do in the woods? Is that a twig? Then, Shikamaru turned around to acknowledge him again, a slightly smug look on his face. I'm sure you didn't know what hit you, right? Instead of replying, Kakashi focused his eyes on Naruto. You'll be hearing of me. Although he was quick to disappear, he could still hear Naruto's till later Kakashi-sensei. Can you believe that? I'll be making official missions as an official ninja. That's so cool. Naruto had been gushing about her new promotion since they left the training field. Shikamaru wouldn't ever admit it out loud, but he found it adorable how she constantly kept on fumbling with her hit I-8, looking up as if trying to spot it on her forehead. Being a shinobi is heavily overrated, he grumbled instead. She rolled her eyes. Why am I not surprised that you said that? But she didn't look annoyed or offended, but rather amused. She giggled. Shikamaru smiled. But it was good of you to figure out the purpose of the test. The information was vital, and without it, you wouldn't have managed to pass, even if you would have gotten the bells on your own. She glowed in response to his comment and turned her head upwards to watch the slowly darkening sky. And I already have a new sensei. That's so awesome, I thought I'd be on my own for a while. He furrowed his brows. What is it? I just wonder why Tsunade chose Kakashi. Whether she had a particular reason for it. She shrugged only. Don't know. Hope he isn't that late the next time we meet, though. After that, he got to see Naruto more and more seldom. Often, she was out of the house so early that she didn't even got to wake Shikamaru up. Most of that time, she spent training with Kakashi. Shikamaru was annoyed and more distant during this period, but he didn't even notice that himself till Asuma-sensei asked him that on a mission. Apart from him and Asuma-sensei, Kiba Inuzuka and Sakura Haruno also took part in the mission. Although he thought Kiba to be too annoying and stupid at times, he could actually halfway stand him. With Sakura however, he did not ever have much contact. In academy, she had been just one of many girls that swooned over Sasuke Uchiha. Most of these girls, or at least those who got to understand the reality of being a shinobi, had grown out of their habits, but Sakura never did. He didn't know whether it was because she was honestly in love with him or just couldn't mature. Sure, she was smart, no, he corrected himself, she was hardworking. In their academy days, she wasn't on the top of their classes because she was particularly intelligent like Shikamaru had been, but rather because she was diligent and ambitious. That was the reason she had become the best medic nin of their generation and was taking part in this mission. It was classified as an A rank, which had resulted in Tsunade choosing ninjas who were individually experts in their fighting methods. Their goal was to deal with a nuke nin from Suna, who had been harassing villages on the edge of the Land of Fire. Night had fallen after they had spent the whole day running through the woods, but all apart from Kiba were still awake. You should both go to sleep. You'll need all the strength you can get tomorrow. The smoke of Asuma-sensei's cigarette gave off a comfortingly familiar smell. Still he didn't answer. He didn't feel like talking, or sleeping, for that matter. I'd like to take the first shift. Sakura's voice was low and on looking more closely, she probably hadn't slept much for more than one day. Probably since they got the mission, he mused. Missions involving nuke nins couldn't awake two good memories. Asuma-sensei sighed exasperatedly. You kids, then he focused his eyes on Shikamaru. What about you? Why is it that you've been sulking since weeks? The Naruto seized into his pants pocket. It's nothing. He furrowed his brows, frustrated that he couldn't find the moss agate when his fingers itched to play with the smooth surface. What is it? His teacher looked slightly concerned. Nothing, just I forgot something. The older man looked at him oddly. Really though, you haven't been quite yourself since some time, Shikamaru. In response, he only shrugged and turned to watch the sky. Hasn't Kakashi got missions to take care of? Asuma-sensei and Sakura seemed confused at the sudden change of topic. "Why are you asking?" the man inquired. Shikamaru shrugged. "Naruto has barely time these days. Spends it all training with him." "Naruto? You mean you're?" The expression on Sakura's face was curious. "My fiancé," Shikamaru spoke out what she was hesitant to voice loudly. He didn't feel uncomfortable referring to Naruto that way anymore. There was silence then, and they resumed to staring at the flames that burned in the center of the loose circle formation they sat in. "Wake me up when my shift begins then," Sakura mumbled and stood up to stumble to her sleeping place. Once she was gone, Asuma-sensei groaned and inhaled deeply from his cigarette. "Who would have thought that we'd be having a talk about women?" Shikamaru, his student, wryly raised an eyebrow at the other man's comment. "Not me." Also, he turned from his sensei to watch the flames again. "This isn't about women, but about Kakashi." Asuma rolled his eyes. "Didn't know you developed a habit of denial." "I'm not. I'm beginning to think you haven't realized it yourself," the man interrupted. "How much you've changed since she arrived in Konoha." Shikamaru didn't fully comprehend that comment and resumed to listening. "I mean, of course, you're still the Shikamaru we know," but the man breathed in smoke, searching for the right words. "You're infatuated with her. Almost always lost in thought, and I'm pretty sure that I know who's up in your head all that time." Shikamaru shrugged. Did he think about Naruto often? He guessed he was. How couldn't he with Naruto being who she was? Asuma sighed. "Of all the ways I predicted this engagement to develop, this wasn't even on my list, not even on the very bottom. Whatever." Now the cigarette only was a stump which caused the smoker to throw it into the fire. "To come back to your actual question, I think Kakashi took some time off with his missions to train Naruto. That much I figured. I was wondering why." Asuma rolled his eyes at the uncharacteristic impatience. As if it wasn't even surprising him anymore. "My prediction. The Chunin exams next week. I didn't see her fight, but judging who her previous sensei was, I'm pretty sure she's above genin level. That's probably why Kakashi wants her to take part in the exams." That only made a little sense. Why not just participate in the next? The Chunin exams are frequent enough. "This time they're in Konoha, though," Asuma said curtly. It made Shikamaru focus his gaze on the man. "Naruto doesn't need home advantage. She's older and her skills are well above the one of a regular genin. Why does Kakashi want her to take part in these exams?" Sighing, the man evaded his gaze and searched in his pocket for a new cigarette. Triumphantly, he stuck it between his lips, and only when it was lit up and he had inhaled the first smoke, he answered Shikamaru. "My guess is that not only Kakashi, but also Tsunade-sama is behind that. Probably because they don't want the other villages to catch wind of her. Although these exams are open to all villages, the higher-ups probably don't want her fuinjutsu skills to get widely known. We're at times of peace, but the element of surprise is always a handy military advantage." Shikamaru frowned at that. He knew that that wasn't the full answer, and certainly not the capacity of Asuma-sensei's knowledge. "Even if the other nations knew that we had a seal master, it wouldn't help them much. They can't prepare themselves for her attacks, since Naruto creates most of these seals on her own anyway." His gaze was piercing. "I know that you, my father, the Hokage, Kakashi, and the council are hiding something. You know something about Naruto that you aren't telling me." Shikamaru could watch how Asuma-sensei tried to hide his surprise and took another drag of the cigarette. "But that's alright. I will find everything out on my own, eventually. After all, it would spoil the fun of solving a riddle if someone just straight out told you the solution." It was almost night time when they returned to Konoha. The mission had been successful, but Shikamaru had taken a deep cut to the side of his waist. It was far from fatal, and since they had a skilled medic nin, not even particularly dangerous. But it still managed to hinder his movements and hurt like a bitch. But when they approached the all-too-familiar gates, he momentarily forgot the pain when he spotted the slight form of a girl whose sunny blonde hair could be distinguished even though it was dark. The moon let her normally bronze skin tone appear fair. The picture made him smile. When they neared the gates close enough to discern individuals, the change in Shikamaru had been apparent. All the time throughout the trip, he was grumbling about his injury or enduring it in an obviously bad mood, but suddenly, he stopped and relaxed. Now Sakura wasn't in close contact to him, but their generation practically grew up together, so she could spot unusual differences if they presented themselves. Asuma only chuckled amusedly and muttered something under his breath. Curious about what had provoked the sudden change of behavior, she steered ahead and tried to spot what they had noticed. There was only one girl leaning against the wall. As they approached further, more features could be distinguished, and Sakura realized that she was unfamiliar with her. From far, Sakura could see that the strange girl had wavy blonde hair that curled even more at the ends. She was short but well proportioned, with a bust size much bigger than Sakura's, but not quite as wide as Hinata's. The pink-haired girl couldn't decide whether the blonde had big hips or her wasp waist only made it look like that. "What are you doing here?" Shikamaru asked, his voice slightly amused. It was so strange that it made Sakura turn in his direction. She almost startled. The look on his face was unusually soft and happy. The girl laughed. "Waiting for you, of course. Tsunade said you were scheduled to return today." She shortly bowed with her head, acknowledging the rest of them. "Hello Asuma-sensei, Kiba-kun," and then her gaze landed on Sakura, the smile on her face open and friendly. "Hey, I'm Naruto," she said, and suddenly all of this made much more sense. Before her stood Shikamaru's fiancé. "I'm Sakura. Nice to meet you." The other girl seemed to want to retort something, but suddenly her smile died down and her azure eyes focused on something next to her. "Shikamaru. Are you injured?" Her voice took a turn of 180 degree. The warmth was gone and replaced by a hard expression. "Nah, only a scratch. Can't even feel it." Sakura's eyes threatened to boggle at the blatant lie. Then again, the way Shikamaru was looking at Naruto, he may have really forgotten about his pain. She tried to smile, because, God, was that cute. As soon as she came home, she had to phone Ino. Her best friend was updating her regularly with gossip, so Sakura would only be returning a courtesy. "But it bleeds." Naruto stepped closer to touch the side of his waist with her fingers. When she pulled them back, they were coated by a thin sheen of red. "The cut must have opened itself," Sakura supplied. The blonde girl looked at her and at Shikamaru till she settled on her fiancé's face. "We should go to the hospital." Shikamaru opened his mouth in what she supposed to be refusal when she decided to step in. "Naruto's right, Shikamaru. Let the wound be cleaned again and let them change the bandages. They'll probably give you some painkillers, too. It wouldn't even take you half an hour." Naruto smiled, as if trying to persuade a child. "Look. It isn't so bad. Come on, I'll come with you, just to make sure everything's okay." Shikamaru grumbled lightly, but he let himself be swayed by her. Just about to leave, he looked back one last time towards Asuma, the leader of this mission's team. "Go. We'll manage to report to Hokage-sama on our own." The Nara heir nodded slightly in acknowledgement while his future wife waved energetically. "See you around." The hospital had been thankfully empty so that they didn't have to wait long for the doctor to look over his wounds. When the man had arrived in the examination room, he'd first looked confusedly to discern who the patient was, till he finally picked up his files to read the information on his patient. Shikamaru couldn't blame him. Although he was the one who'd freshly returned from a mission, Naruto didn't look very well herself. Not only did she have a fair share of scratches, but also her clothes were torn and dirty at many places. Lost in mind, he mustered them. They were actually pretty unusual for her standards. No flowery dresses, but black functional shorts with many pockets that reached her mid-thigh, a simple but tight black top, and a loose neon orange jacket. But even though what she wore was undoubtedly ruined, she still managed to look good in it. "Nara-san, if you would please remove your clothing to the point I can examine your wound," the doctor's voice interrupted his thoughts. He wondered how often the man had repeated his sentence while he was in thought. Just as he was about to react, Naruto stepped up and before he could lift a finger, she stood in front of him and zipped his vest down. "He is exhausted since he just came from a mission," she explained the doctor. "They probably thought he hit his head or something." Although nothing close to that happened, he let Naruto strip his upper part of the body. Her nimble fingers were gentle and sending shivers up his skin when she touched him without the barrier of the fabric. Then, she made a face and let out a hiss. He turned his head to look at his wound she was undoubtedly watching. It sure looked a lot worse with the bloody and partly torn bandages covering it. The doctor approached him even further and ducked his head to look at the mess on his skin, as well. Then, he started to remove the bandages. "You might better want to lie down. The more relaxed your muscles are, the better I can do my job, and the less pain you'll feel." He moved to get some cotton pads and disinfectant. "Do you want something to ease your pain, Nara-san?" Any other day he'd have said yes. But painkillers would make him drowsy and assured an early sleep. Sleep seemed like a waste of time, now that Naruto wasn't training and could stay with him. Shortly, he asked himself whether he had really hit his head without noticing, because, since when was sleeping a waste of time? Still, he answered, no, curtly. Naruto furrowed her brows at that. "Can you still give us some? Maybe he'll change his mind back at home." The doctor nodded and moistened the cotton pads with the disinfectant. Shikamaru simply lied down and let the doctor do his work while watching Naruto watching him with a worried glance. She looked so honest and open while displaying her emotions that he found it harder to entertain the idea that she might be acting. His mind asked him whether he only wanted to believe that because he actually liked the fact that Naruto was concerned about him. "Some stitches will be necessary," the doctor stated after close inspection of the now clean wound. "But it's a clean cut and if you don't move too much in the next days, it should heal just fine. Still, I'll give you a salve that should fasten the process and put some fresh bandages on." The man started searching for said bandages in some cupboards and returned to continue his job. They should be changed regularly, though. He stopped moving his hands in favor of looking at Naruto. Can I trust you do that, Nara-san? At the first moment, Shikamaru thought that the guy mixed their names up, but then the blonde girl started stuttering. Oh, no, my name's still Uzumaki. She embarrassedly scratched her head. The marriage is still months away. Oh. The expression on the man's face was surprised and he sheepishly alternately looked between them. I apologize. It might seem unprofessional, but bored nurses often gossip and I sometimes can't help but listen. So they still were a hot topic. Anyway, I can change the bandages just fine. The doctor nodded, satisfied with Naruto's response. Here's the prescription for some light painkillers. When they arrived home, Shikamaru tiredly collapsed on the couch. Do you know where my father is? He wasn't surprised about his mother's absence since she went to visit her sister who lived in a village close to Konoha. The Nara matriarch had already departed before Shikamaru's mission started and would only return tomorrow. His father, however, was supposed to be home. Something about going to the bar with his friends, Naruto murmured absent-mindedly. That didn't surprise Shikamaru in the slightest. The older man probably tried to amuse himself while his wife was gone. I'll go draw you a bath, Naruto interrupted his thoughts, and before he could retort, she was already gone. She was back about 10 minutes later to be greeted with Shikamaru's slightly raised eyebrow. I am not fully incapacitated, he told her, but his fiancée would have none of it. The doctor wanted you not to move too much. But that she steered him towards the bathroom. To his surprise, tub threatened to overflow with the bubbles that hindered him from seeing what lay under them. There was probably essential oil in it too, judging the scent of coconuts that lightly filled the air. He laughed silently. Too hard laughing hurt his side. I'm not a child, you know. But she only smiled, as if telling a secret and stated, you don't have to be a child to get the opportunity to feel good. Then she motioned to the upper part of his body. Lift your shirt. Confused, he could only react with a what? She rolled her eyes in response. I have to place this special giant band-aid thingy so the wound doesn't get wet. When did you get that? The doctor gave it with the painkillers. You want a pill now? No. After she placed the thing on his wound and effectively sealed it from the environment, she moved to the door. I'll be in the other bathroom, taking a shower. Don't drown on me, alright? Her tone was only half joking, and Shikamaru almost felt bad that she believed him to be so injured that he couldn't even manage to stay alive. But soon he forgot these thoughts when he was sitting in the tub and tried to wash his hair. He could only use his left arm since taking the other one to help pulled at the muscles of his right side where the injury lay. But washing his hair with only one hand was apparently very hard and too damn tiring. He sighed. Troublesome. After that, he decided to only wash his body and let the hair be, he could do it another time. With that goal, he relaxed his tired muscles and lied back, inhaling the soothing scents. Shikamaru. Naruto was peeking through the little gap of the unclosed door. Aren't you finished? I was honestly starting to think that you've drowned. Yeah, I'm done. She skeptically raised an eyebrow. But there is still foam in your hair. Washing it strains my wound. Instantly, Naruto's face softened and Shikamaru felt a little guilty for causing her worry. Then, she fully moved into the room and approached him, or rather the space behind him. There was rustling and suddenly, there was water being casted over his hair, wetting the little bit that had dried. Before he could react, Naruto grabbed the shampoo bottle and put some of the contents on his head and started massaging his scalp. He didn't ask what she was doing as it was quite obvious, and he believed that more often than not, her actions weren't comprehensible anyway. Apart from that, the sensation of thin fingers running in circles on his head was so relaxing that it made him loose the muscles he didn't know he was tensing. Completely leaning back, he was drowsy with that sensation. He chuckled lowly. Maybe I should get injured more often. It was a sharp but playful flick on the back of his neck. Don't you dare. The tone was again, only half joking. He closed his eyes as she returned to the gentle movements again. If I had known that this is what marriage is like, I would have insisted on marrying you much sooner. She laughed. You wish. When he leaned back in his bed, comfortable like he hadn't been in some time, Naruto started putting on the bandages. Somewhere in his mind, he tried to remind himself that he shouldn't completely relax in the proximity of a person he couldn't fully trust, but in his current state, it was ridiculously easy to shut that part out. I'll go make you something to eat. With that, Naruto left the room. As soon as she exited, he leaned over his bed to reach for the nightstand. Pulling out the cupboard, he luckily spotted what he was searching for. Naruto's moss agate with the string still drawn through it. If he concentrated enough, he could still sense the faint remains of her chakra resting in it. Determined, he pulled both ends of the string in each hand and reached it around his neck to tie it together. The slight but unfamiliar weight felt strange. Without pondering it further, he stuck the gem underneath his shirt, where it became almost invisible to his environment. Naruto's present felt like a secret. He had only shown it to Choji once, and even Naruto herself hadn't asked what he had done with her gift. The cold stone against his bare skin warmed up gradually as he grabbed it to play absent-mindedly with it. After what felt like half-hour, Naruto was back with a tray of what looked like chicken soup. Eating in bed. Whoever thought that being injured was troublesome either was a complete idiot or they didn't have a Naruto Uzumaki in their life. So, he started, while sipping alternately from the soup. It was good. Since when do you have so much free time to spare? She sighed and moved to sit on his left side of the bed. She looked exhausted. Yesterday, Kakashi-sensei told me that the Chunin exams are coming up next week. I know he wants me to take part, although he insists that it is solely my independent decision. What about you? Her voice morphed into a determined, if slightly grim expression. Yes. I know that I can do it. So I will do it. That's also what I told sensei. Therefore he doesn't want to train me that hard this week, only chakra control exercises. We don't want me to enter the exams with an injury. Finishing his soup he relaxed and turned to look at her. If you'll pass, I'm pretty that you would slowly get assigned for missions. Her face brightened and removed the seriousness. We could go on missions together, Shikamaru. Then, she slowly smirked foxily. And then, you'll find out just how much you can trust me. The end. So how was this part? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this part with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.